True or false? Napoleon Hill had a secret meeting with Andrew Carnegie, the richest man in the world at the time, and at that meeting, Carnegie shared with Hill the secrets of accumulating incredible wealth, which was the basis for Hill's Think and Grow Rich. Now this is big because it supports the very foundation upon which the book Think and Grow Rich is built, so it deserves some further and deeper examination. According to the official legend, sometime around 1908, Napoleon Hill was invited by Carnegie to spend the weekend at the billionaire's 64-room mansion in New York City, at which time Carnegie supposedly revealed to him the principles of achievement, the concept of the mastermind, and those arcane hidden secrets to financial success. And the answer is false. Between the domestic disputes, a nasty divorce, and accusations of fraudulent business deals in lumber, it would appear Hill spent much of 1908 simply trying to stay one step ahead of the authorities. In fact, one of Carnegie's most respected and thorough biographers, David Nassau, a professor of history at City University of New York, has found no record that Hill and Carnegie ever met. When pressed about the possibility that Think and Grow Rich could be based on an actual meeting and conversation between Andrew Carnegie and Napoleon Hill, Nassau replied, "Let me put it this way. I found no evidence of what's contained in Think and Grow Rich with regard to Andrew Carnegie to be authentic." If this account is in fact false, then by extension we must assume that the entire premise upon which Think and Grow Rich is built is false as well, and simply the creation of Hill's fertile imagination. True or false? Napoleon Hill was once arrested for selling fraudulent stocks. And the answer is true. In 1915, Napoleon Hill started the George Washington Institute, probably the world's first institute dedicated to teaching the principles of success and self-confidence. But by 1918, the Institute had come under the scrutiny of government regulators who accused Hill of a stock-selling scheme. Hill was arrested for violating the Illinois Blue Sky Law and spent 3 days in jail before posting a $2,000 bond. True or false? Napoleon Hill was an advisor and confidant to 3 sitting presidents, including Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, and Franklin D. Roosevelt. This is also false. In later life, Hill would often tell the story of how he was approached by President Woodrow Wilson at the tail end of World War I in 1918 to assist and advise in the war effort. Now here's where the story gets a little weird. Napoleon Hill claimed that he was sitting in the Oval Office at the White House with President Wilson in 1918 when word came that Germany was ready to surrender and end the war. He says the president handed him a top-secret document outlining Germany's surrender and asked Hill to write up the terms of surrender for the Germans. Okay, so let me get this straight. Napoleon Hill, a man with absolutely no political experience and who never held political office in his life, was asked by the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world at the time, to negotiate a surrender for the Germans. Why not? The only problem is there's absolutely no evidence other than Napoleon Hill's personal account that he ever met Woodrow Wilson, let alone conferred with him. Woodrow Wilson mentioned nothing of this meeting in his memoirs, and it's not mentioned in any of Wilson's biographies. In fact, Hill's own published writings from between 1915 and 1919, when this event was said to have occurred, don't even mention the event at all. In later years, Hill was fond of saying that it was he who penned those famous words for Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidential inauguration that gave hope to many Americans during the country's darkest years of the Great Depression.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
But again, here we have no written evidence that Hill was ever a confidant of Franklin Roosevelt, except Hill's own writing. True or false, Napoleon Hill was nearly whacked by gangsters during the Roaring Twenties. This story appears to be true. The story starts in Canton, Ohio, which, like many cities during the 1920s, was experiencing a period of explosive growth. And with prohibition in full swing, Canton had its share of speakeasies, brothels, opium dens, and women of easy virtue. It was also a hotbed of police corruption and mob activity, as gangsters slugged it out in a violent turf war to determine who was going to supply Canton with all that bootleg liquor. In the middle of this was Donald Mellett, a friend of Napoleon Hill's and an idealistic young reporter who had made it his business to expose the corruption that was tearing Canton apart. Mellett's blistering editorials in his newspaper made a point of exposing Canton's seedy underworld of prostitution, drug smuggling, gangland murders, and payoffs to corrupt cops. His expose of Canton's underworld and its ties to the police eventually resulted in the firing of Canton's chief of police. As a result, Mellett began receiving death threats by the mail and telephone. But this didn't stop him from ramping up his assault on Canton's corruption. So it came as no surprise when on a hot summer night in 1926, Mellett was gunned down while parking his car in his garage, assassinated by either gangsters, corrupt police, or most likely a conspiracy involving the two. The citizens of Canton were outraged at this attack on one of their own. Mellett's friend, Napoleon Hill, immediately called for a thorough investigation into the murder. During the investigation, Hill was going around town telling anyone who would listen that he knew who whacked Mellett, and that the murder was carried out by organized crime leaders who were in cahoots with the former police chief. Now, whether Hill really had the goods on who murdered Donald Mellett has never been substantiated, but it wasn't long before Hill started receiving death threats himself. And in a story very eerily similar to the murder of Donald Mellett, one night a bunch of Canton gangsters were seen hanging around Napoleon Hill's garage, ready to rub him out the moment his car pulled in. The only thing that saved Hill's life was the fact that he had car trouble that night, which prevented him from returning home. When Hill got word of just how close he had come to catching a bullet, he didn't waste any time hightailing it out of town. In fact, he left in such a hurry, he didn't even bother to pack. It's said he spent the next year of his life trying to lay low from crooked Canton police and gun-happy gangsters. Myth number 8. True or false? Did Mahatma Gandhi, India's patron saint of peaceful resistance, really send spies from India to follow Napoleon Hill? This is most likely false. After the 1941 publication of what he considered his greatest work, Mental Dynamite, Hill claimed that Gandhi was so impressed with the great work Hill was doing, he wanted to distribute millions of Napoleon's books to people in India. Now, according to Hill, Gandhi sent emissaries from India to the United States to spy on Hill in order to see if he was just a ghostwriter or if he was the real McCoy. Napoleon Hill was fond of boasting to crowds that Gandhi was one of his biggest fans, and that Gandhi had hired one of the leading detective agencies in America, the Pinkerton Detective Agency, to follow him around 24 hours to see if he was really on the level.